welcome to those of you who are joining us on Facebook tonight. We're glad you took the time out of your Tuesday night to join us. I want to get back into a study that we began a few weeks ago. We started talking about Yeshua's messages to the 7 churches of Asia in the book of Revelation. And I'll do a quick recap on what we had talked about. We started out with the church of Ephesus. If you'll recall, we said how the Ephesus was one of the biggest cities in Asia Minor at the time. It was a major center for the worship of the goddess Diana. It was also a place where there was a lot of activity in the early church. There was a very extensive presence of the early church. It was the church that Timothy preached to. It was the church that John in his later years was in before he was sent to the Isle of Patmos in exile. And it's the church where they believe that Yeshua's mother Mary ended up residing in the city of Ephesus. We talked about how the church of Ephesus underwent a lot of persecution, as did most of the churches in Asia Minor. But it also was the biggest church at the time. But we talked about how Yeshua's message to the church of Ephesus was that they had lost their first love. They had lost the passion that they had at first in serving the Lord. So picking up tonight, we'll move on to the next church. So let's turn over to Revelation chapter 2. Revelation chapter 2, and we'll begin at verse 1. To the angel messenger of the assembly in Ephesus write, you'll recall that we said how the word angel in this passage actually refers to messenger. So it was most likely referring to the pastor. You know, it's interesting because Yeshua himself doesn't even bypass the pastor of the church. He goes right to the head and says, if I'm going to address something in the church, I'm going right to where it starts. And so he's basically calling to account these pastors and how they're leading the church and how the condition of the flock they're overseeing is. So to the angel of the assembly in Ephesus write, these are the words of him who holds the 7 stars, which are the messengers of the 7 churches, in his right hand, who goes about among the 7 golden lampstands, which are the 7 churches. We talked about how it's the number 7 is significant in the Bible. We know the significance of the number 7. It's Yahweh's number. You know, there's 7 days in the week of creation. There are seven churches that he mentions. And while this passage is talking to specific churches, these are literal churches. He's writing literal letters to literal churches. But we can extract a lot from what Yeshua said to these churches that we can apply to the church of today. Because, you know, we're still living, people say the early church, and it's a tendency for all of us to refer to it as the early church. We're in the same church. It's not a new church. We haven't come to a modern society where now the church changes. But the church is supposed to be the church, whether it was in the 1st century or whether it's in the 21st century. We're supposed to be marked as the people of God. And so these are referring to, as I said, literal letters, but they're supposed to be reflecting on us as well. Verse 2, this is what he says to the church of Ephesus. I know your industry and activities, laborious toil and trouble, and your patient endurance, and how you cannot tolerate wicked men, and have tested and critically appraised those who call themselves apostles, and yet are not, and have found them to be impostors and liars. You remember how we said in Ephesus there was a great influx of false teachers and people who were coming in trying to bring new theology and new ideas to test in the church. And the church of Ephesus had done a very good job at weeding those people out and preventing that from spreading to the rest of Asia Minor. You know, a side note is it says that in the end times there will be those false prophets, those false teachers that are going to be rising up and deceiving many. And there's some in the church that fall on either side of, they can fall into 2 ditches. Either everybody who comes into the building or everybody who they see who's on TV as a minister, they're a false prophet. Or they're so unaware of anything that has to do with false prophets that they swallow everything hook, line, and sinker. You know, we need to find the middle of the road on that and be able to test the spirits to see if they're of Yahweh. Remember we talked about on Sabbath the pastor who's talking about how we need to have a new Testament that's written for modern times, and we need to come away from the ancient theology of the Bible, and we need to not be restricted by this ancient book, and it needs to be modernized. That would be an example of someone who's coming in and it's leading the church astray. If anything is bringing in a root of compromise, if anything is bringing in, well, we don't have to keep the word, then that's the thing that you need to be watching out for. If it's somebody who's coming in and maybe they have a different interpretation of a certain scripture, but they truly have a heart after God and they truly are trying to follow him and they're interpreting it to the best of their ability, you know what? We don't speak against them. We talked about that on Sabbath too, about people who would just spend their whole time speaking against all these leaders, and regardless of if they know them personally or not. You know, there's entire websites that are dedicated to exposing Brother Copeland and exposing all these people. Well, who called you to be the one who's exposing all these people in the first place? Is your calling in life to be the exposer of people who are prominent? You know, what are you doing in your own personal life to serve the Lord? A lot of times those people who are stirring up the most trouble are the ones who are doing the least as far as the kingdom of God is concerned. So that's kind of a side note. I can get back on the track here. Verse 3, I know you are enduring patiently and are bearing up for my name's sake, and if you have not fainted or become exhausted or grown weary. But I have this one charge to make against you, that you have left the love that you had at first. You have deserted me, your first love. Remember then from what heights you have fallen, repent and do the works you did previously, or else I will visit you and remove your lampstand from its place, unless you change your mind and repent. Serious words from the Lord to this church. Yet you have this in your favor and to your credit. You hate the works of the Nicolaitans, what they are doing as corrupters of the people, which I myself also detest. He who is able to hear, let him listen and give heed to what the Spirit says to the assemblies. To him who overcomes, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. So that's his letter to Ephesus, which we covered. We're not going to get in depth on that. We're going to move on to verse 8. To the angel messenger of the assembly in Smyrna write, these are the words of the first and the last who died and came to life again. I know your affliction and distress, and pressing trouble and your poverty, but you are rich. And how you are abused and reviled and slandered by those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Fear nothing that you are about to suffer. Dismiss your dread and your fears. Behold, the devil is indeed about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested and proved and critically appraised, and for 10 days you will have affliction. Be loyally faithful unto death, even if you must die for it, and I will give you the crown of life. He who is able to hear, let him listen to and heed what the Spirit says to the assemblies. He who overcomes shall in no way be injured by the second death. So that's his messenger to the church of Smyrna. Now it's interesting because in this letter that was written to the church of Smyrna, Yeshua has no rebuke for them. It's one of only two of the churches that he had nothing critical or exposing to say about them. Church of Smyrna and the Church of Philadelphia are the only two. And he's basically, it's an encouraging message, and it's one that's commending them. But let's look a little bit of a background on the Church of Smyrna so we can give some context to what he's saying. Smyrna was located only 35 miles north of Ephesus, so they're all in the same kind of location there. It was at the head of the Aegean Sea, and it was known for its beauty, wealth, and achievement. The city rivaled Ephesus in grandeur and influence. So there's this competition that's kind of going on between all these cities of Asia Minor as far as who had the best of this and who was the best in this and who had the biggest temple of this and who had the different aspects that made them great in the Roman Empire. Ancient coin inscriptions describe Smyrna as the first of Asia in size and beauty and the ornament of Asia. Not only was it considered a center of prosperity, but it was a hub of intellect, art, religion, and athletic prowess. Some of the first schools of science and medicine were founded in Smyrna, and on the beautiful slopes of Mount Pagos, the city erected a theater that's at 20,000 people. Olympian Games were held in Smyrna, so they would have been familiar with the Olympics in Smyrna. It's interesting because when he says to them that he will give them a crown of life, that would have been a picture to this church, that they had been seeing these Olympics, the Olympians competing for that crown. They would get a crown, a wreath on their head. And he's saying that if you overcome, I'm going to give you more than just a wreath on your head that's going to wither and fade away and be lost to history, but I'm going to give you a crown of life that will endure forever. In the center of the city, Mount Pagos stood 500 feet high and was encircled by a garland of architecturally impressive buildings. The hill was known as the Crown of Smyrna. So there again, he's pointing to the crown. Scripture doesn't give us any information on the founding of this church, nor is it mentioned in the book of Acts. One of the ones we don't really know. Presumably, the church was founded during Paul's ministry in Ephesus. That would make sense since it's only 35 miles away. The Greek word, this is where it gets interesting. The Greek word translated Smyrna was used in the Septuagint to translate the Hebrew word for myrrh. So it's known as the city of myrrh, the spice myrrh, which was used as a perfume for the living and the dead. Remember when the women went to the tomb, and that was one of the embalming spices that they would use. But it's interesting because the correlation between Smyrna, this word Smyrna that represents myrrh, and this church of Smyrna is that myrrh can only be produced when the plant's crushed. So kind of gives that image of the persecution that the believers were enduring in Smyrna. But it gives off a fragrant aroma. So when they're feeling pressured by the persecution that's coming against us is when they're giving off the best influence for Yahweh. Throughout history, Smyrna had its fair share of hardship. Seldom has a decade gone by without a significant event ravishing the city. Now, that's an interesting thing. It's the modern Turkish city of Izmir is where Smyrna is located today. Time and again, wars, massacres, earthquakes, and plagues have threatened to destroy Smyrna, but the city has always bounced back and rebuilt. More Christians have lived in this region than any other Turkish city in the world, and the local church still thrives there. So it's been a very interesting history that it's had. So when you look at it, the Church of Smyrna, as I said, would have been familiar with the idea of a victor's crown. We talk about the victor's crown, those who wear the victor's crown, because of the athletic contest that took place. Garlands of victory were only given to the highest achieving athletes. There was no second place. This wasn't like modern day where everybody gets a medal, you know, even for just participating, you get a trophy. No, this was if you think you're the best of the best in the world, you have to prove it, and only the one who is at the top at the end will get the crown. So it was a highly sought after and a highly fought position. Every other competitor, even if you think of it, the Olympics, think of the modern day Olympics. Think of the Olympic swimmers. Let's just take swimming, for example. And we think of like gold medalists, Michael Phelps, or other gold medalists. Can you name a silver or bronze medalist? I mean, these are the guys who are the top of the top in the world. And even second place in the Olympics, you place second in the Olympics, that's a great achievement. But nobody remembers. You have to go and search it out and find out who are the second and third place. But all the people remember the gold medalists. It's that way in life too. You can give your hardest at something, but if you end up coming in behind where you're supposed to reach, the level you're supposed to reach, people aren't going to remember you. That's why Yeshua and Paul talks so much about striving for that crown. Paul talks about that in Timothy, where he said that the Olympic athletes do it to receive a crown that fades, but we do it to receive a crown that endures forever. And he says that just like those people give their all into their competition, and so that they can be the best, that's what we're supposed to look at. That is an imagery of what we're supposed to give to Yahweh. We're supposed to give our best to him and leave nothing out. It's like that image in Facing the Giants of when he's going alongside Brock and saying, give me your best, give me your best. Don't stop until you've given your best. And sometimes it can seem like, I've done a pretty good job. I've run a good amount. I think I've done well in my life. But don't stop yet. You're not done yet. No, you're not done until you think you have nothing left in you. And then what does it say? His strength will come in the midst of your weakness. Where you think you're weak, that's when his strength shows itself best in you. So this church was a church, as it shows in Revelation there, it was a church that underwent a lot of persecution. Now, persecution is kind of a topic that, especially in our circles, we don't like to talk about. You know, the faith camp, it's like, well, you know, we're always overcomers and all that. Yeah, that's true. But there is a lot that even Yeshua had to say about persecution. Let's turn over to John chapter 15 for a moment. Where better to look than the words of Yeshua himself? John chapter 15. We'll start at verse 16. You have not chosen me, but I have chosen you, and I have appointed you. I have planted you that you might go and bear fruit and keep on bearing, and that your fruit may be lasting, that it may remain and abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. This is what I command you, that you love one another. Now, those are all scriptures that we're very familiar with, like to talk about those scriptures. But a lot of people stop there and don't move on to the next verse. Verse 18, if the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you. People don't really like to focus on that. But it's just as much words, Yeshua's words, as the previous verses. Verse 19, if you belong to the world would treat you with affection and would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, no longer one with it, but I have chosen and selected you out of the world hates you. Okay, so we're told by Yeshua the world's going to hate you because you're like me. They hate me, they're going to hate you. It calls to question, then, if there's some churches and some members of the church that are buddy-buddy with the world and, oh, everybody in the world just loves them. Are they really being the witnesses for Yeshua that they're supposed to be? Are they really standing up for biblical truths? Are they really letting their lives, as it says in the scriptures, be so in contrast that it's reproving the works of darkness? Now, I'm not saying to be obnoxious and go and preach at every single person that crosses your path, but your life itself should be such a reflection that they feel convicted. I mean, Dad talks about how even working in the corporate world, he'd have people who would be, you know, foul-mouthed drinkers, whatever, but around him they suddenly would start apologizing for what they were saying. Well, he didn't go around saying, you guys are going to hell, you shouldn't be speaking like that, you know. No, you don't even have to say a word, but because they see how your life is a reflection, then they're going to know that you hold a different standard. They should see the light in you so much that it shows them the difference. Keep going on, verse 20. Remember that I told you a servant is not greater than his master, is not superior to him. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word and obeyed my teaching, they will also keep and obey yours. But they will do all this to you, inflict all this suffering on you, because of your bearing my name and on my account, for they do not know or understand the one who sent me. So that's another word that's not popular, suffering. And I think it's because there's a lot in the church that have kind of gotten into this, I don't know what the word is, but into this mentality of we're just suffering for Jesus. And it including like, oh yeah, I'm sick all the time. I'm poor, I can't pay my bills, I'm broke, busted, and disgusted, but that's just my cross I'm bearing, and I'm suffering for Jesus. You don't see anywhere in the Word where it says that being poor and sick and broke is the way you're supposed to pick up your cross and follow him. You know, you see that denying your flesh is a big way that it says to pick up your cross and follow him, and that is a suffering. When your flesh really wants something and you're telling it no, your flesh is suffering. That is a suffering. When people are starting to speak against you because you're taking a certain biblical stand, that's suffering. That's what he's referring to. And you can't get away from that kind of suffering. There's a certain kind of suffering as far as sickness and disease and poverty and stuff like that that has been covered by Yeshua's death on the cross. That he bore that for us. But he doesn't say anything about bearing persecution for us or bearing the suffering of people coming against us. No, he's warning us that they came against me. You think you're higher up than me? You think you're better than me? That you'll never have to encounter any kind of difficulty or persecution? No. Because we're taking a stand that is so in contrast to the world. We talked about that in the city of Ephesus. That it was the believers of Ephesus were confronted by a culture around them that was so enveloped in the idol worship and so enveloped in everything that surrounded the idol worship and the works of the flesh and everything. And their lives were so in contrast that these people were coming against them. It's like, hey, I hate you because you're living in this way. What's the matter with you? Smyrna had the same type of thing. Let's turn over to Matthew chapter 5. And let's start at verse, we'll start at verse 5. This is right in the middle of Yeshua preaching the Sermon on the Mount, as it's called, the Beatitudes, saying how blessed these people are. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be completely satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the makers and maintainers of peace, for they shall be called the sons of God. Blessed, verse 10, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for being and doing right, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil things against you falsely on my account. Be glad and supremely joyful, for your reward in heaven is great, strong and intense. For in the same way people persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, there he's saying you're blessed if you're persecuted. I don't know that in the natural, a lot of us look at that as a blessing. Like somebody's speaking bad things against us. I mean, come on, we've all had especially in this church, have had things that have been said against us falsely. Now, I have to put this in there as kind of like a side note. There's also some people who tend to think they're being persecuted by people around them all the time because of their stand, because they're Christians and all that. When in reality, they're kind of being persecuted for their own personality. There can be a persecution that can come upon you just because you're not a nice person. Just saying. There can be a persecution that can come upon you just because you don't know how to word things the right way. That's not a persecution for the word's sake, and there's no blessing attached to that. I'm just putting that out there. But when it's truly that you are taking a stand for the word, you know, as it says, speaking the truth, how? In love. We got to be speaking the truth in love, not just putting it out there bluntly, so, you know, whatever. But when we are truly taking that stand for Yahweh and we're persecuted because of that, there's a blessing that's attached to it. But it's interesting because Yeshua, right in the midst of this sermon where he's saying, blessed are all these people because they're doing these right things, basically the meek because they're going to inherit the earth. But he says, blessed are you when they persecute you and revile you and say all kinds of evil things against you. So if somebody starts saying something against you, you should say, I am blessed. How should we look at it? Like, I must be those who inherit the kingdom of God, because they're coming against me. If you're one with the world, they're not going to come against you. They're going to think you're just like them. And there's too many churches and too many Christians nowadays that are trying to be one with the world. this whole seeker-sensitive movement that's trying to adapt to the culture, compromise with the culture, really no different than the early church had to struggle with the same things with the idolatrous culture that was around them. But if you're compromising with the world, you're lowering your standards, but they're not your standards. They're the Bible standards. If you're giving them such a watered-down version of Christianity that they can barely recognize that you are even a Christian, then you're not being the witness, number one, that you're supposed to be. You're giving them a false representation of what you claim to follow. And then that's when you find in the end that it says, many will come to me and say, Lord, Lord, look what we did in your name. We did all these things in your name. And he says, depart from me. I never knew you. You didn't have my heart. We want his heart. We want to see things through his eyes. And does he at some points give strong words? I mean, further down in the Beatitudes, he says, if your eye causes you to sin, cut it out and throw it away. And if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to live and go to heaven with one hand than to go to hell with both. These are strong words that Yeshua said. They're not tickle your ears words. But he said it in a place of true love and compassion for these people. And everyone who was around him knew, not only is he different, but they knew he loved them. Why is it that the tax collectors and sinners all gathered around him? Was it because he was drinking and doing everything with them? No. He stood out as someone who was different, but not as someone who was in a high-minded place of, you're so low and I can't even associate with you. He did it in a way of, I'm reaching out to get you. Chosen does that very well when it shows him going in to get Mary out of that place. And it's like, Mary's caught in this place where she's caught up in the thing. Yeshua walks in specifically to get her. Doesn't even address what's going on, doesn't get caught up in what's going on. He's separate from it, but he's relatable to the people. And again, that's kind of where the church is missing it today. You got two ditches. You got some that are going and picketing at soldiers' funerals because they don't believe in the military, and and going and picketing at these things. Let's focus on what is our mission, being light in the world, standing up against the darkness and all that, but doing it in a way that people can see the goodness of our God, can see that they don't have to live that way anymore. Let's turn over to Matthew chapter 10, just a few verses to the right. Let's start at verse 5, Matthew 10:5. Yeshua sent out these 12, charging them, go nowhere among the Gentiles and do not go into any town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Take no gold, nor silver, nor copper money in your purses, and do not take a provision bag or a wallet for a collection bag for your journey, nor 2 undergarments, nor sandals, nor a staff, for the workman deserves his support. And into whatever town or village you go, inquire who in it is deserving, and stay there at his house until you leave that vicinity. Now right there, that's kind of a question that we might find different. Who is deserving? Well, people will think, well, everybody's deserving, or everybody deserves something. No, not according to this. Find out who's deserving. What would make one person in this town more deserving of them staying with them than the other? Somebody who's ready to receive what they have to give. What does he say about not casting your pearls in front of the swine? Don't keep going to somebody who's rejecting you. They're not in a place where they're ready to hear what you have to say. Verse 12, as you go into the house, give your greetings and wish it well. Then if indeed that house is deserving, let come upon it your peace. But if it is not deserving, let your peace return to you. And whoever will not receive and accept and welcome you, nor listen to your message, as you leave that house or town, shake the dust of it from your feet. Truly I tell you, it shall be more tolerable in the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town. Behold, I am sending you out like sheep in the midst of wolves. Be wary and wise as serpents, and be innocent, harmless, guileless, and without falsity as doves. Be on guard against men, for they will deliver you up to councils and flog you in their synagogues. And you will be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a witness to bear testimony before them and to the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, do not be anxious about how or what you shall speak, for what you are to say will be given to you in that very hour and moment. For it is not you who are speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking against you. Brother will deliver up brother to death, and father his child, and children will take a stand against their parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake. Well, we're kind of getting to a point where a lot of people are hating us, but we're not hated by all yet. But he who perseveres and endures to the end will be saved from spiritual disease and death in the world to come. When they persecute you in one town, flee to another town. For truly I tell you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant or slave above his master. It is sufficient for the disciple to be like his teacher, and the servant or slave like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they speak evil of those of his household? I mean, think of it. If they said all the things that they said about Yeshua, why would we be surprised if they start saying stuff like that about us? So have no fear of them, for nothing is concealed that will not be revealed, or kept secret that will not become known. Going down to verse 30, even the very hairs of your head are numbered. Fear not then, you are much more value than many sparrows. Therefore everyone who acknowledges me before men and confesses me, I will also acknowledge him before my Father who is in heaven, and confess that I am abiding in him. But whoever denies and disowns me before men, I also will deny and disown him before my Father who is in heaven. Now, a lot of people look at that and say, like, I'm never going to say words like I deny him. But are some people denying him by their actions? You know the phrase, actions speak louder than words? You can say, yeah, no, I follow him, but then your actions are saying something else. Or your actions are saying you're kind of apologizing for the stand you're taking and all that. Then you really are denying him. Verse 34, do not think that I have come to bring peace upon the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to part asunder a man from his father, and a daughter from her mother, and a newly married wife from her mother-in-law. And a man's foes will be they of his own household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. He who does not take up his cross and follow me, cleave steadfastly, conforming wholly to my example in living, and if need be in dying also, is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his lower life will lose it, the higher life. And whoever loses his lower life on my account will find it, the higher life. Now, when you look at this, again, he's talking about the things that they're going to encounter as they're going. He's preparing them. He's telling them, don't be surprised when these things start happening. Go down to Matthew chapter 13. And this is what we call the parable of the sower, though it's the parable of the soil, really, is what it is, because it's the sower's the same, the seed's the same, the soil's what makes the difference. Chapter 13, verse 1, that same day Yeshua went out of the house and was sitting beside the sea, but such great crowds gathered about him that he got into a boat and remained sitting there while all the throngs stood on the shore. And he told them many things in parables, saying, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell by the roadside, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky soil where there was not much soil, and at once they sprang up because they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they dried up and withered away. Other seeds fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them out. Other seeds fell on good soil and yielded grain, some 100 times as much what was sown, some 60 times as much, and some 30. He who has ears to hear, let him be listening. Does that sound familiar? That's what he said to the churches in Revelation. He who has ears to hear, let him hear what I'm saying. Verse 10, then the disciples came to him and said, why do you speak to them in parables? He replied to them, to you has been given to know the secrets and mysteries of the kingdom, but to them it has not been given. For whoever has, to him will more be given, but from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away. This is the reason I speak to them in parables. Skip down to verse 18. Listen then to the meaning of the parable of the sower. While anyone is hearing the word of the kingdom and does not grasp and comprehend it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in the heart. This is what was sown on the roadside. As for that which was sown on thin, rocky soil, this is he who hears the word and at once welcomes it and accepts it with joy, yet it has no real root in him, but is temporary, inconstant, lasts but a little while. And when affliction or trouble or persecution comes on account of the word, at once he is caused to stumble. He is repelled and begins to distrust and desert him whom he ought to trust and obey, and he falls away. Now that's very interesting there. The word came, they grabbed hold of it. Yeah, this is exciting. I want to run with it. But somebody starts taking a stand against them because of the word, or coming against them, saying things against them, and at once they fall away. Could that be why it says that before Yeshua comes in the end times, there will be a great falling away? The falling away is usually those who are encountering some sort of persecution. And that's one of the biggest things. By nature, persecution reveals those who are authentic and those who are not. Where are the places in the world where you have the most passionate, authentic Christians? In the Middle East, in China, in places in the world where it's not popular to be a Christian. Why is that? Because in all other parts of the world in the West, it's a social club. You know, you could go and join this social club or that social club, or you could go to this church, and that's the popular thing to do. I got friends there, you know, this is fun, it's cool. It's the cool thing to do. But what happens when the church isn't a cool place to be? What happens when the word is hard that's coming forward? What happens when it's confronting things that may be cross-culture? That's when people start to fall away. That's when people start to realize, this is a hard message. Even Yeshua encountered that when he had the multitudes that were following him, and then he preached the message about eat my body and drink my blood, and they all left him except for the 12, and he even said to them, you guys want to leave too? It's those who are able to withstand and keep their roots deep, no matter what the winds that come up against them, no matter what waves blow up against them, if they're founded on the rock and they know, what is that rock? The rock of the revelation of who he is and what this word means. If you have a grounding in knowing what that means to you, you're not going to be shaken no matter what comes against you, no matter who says what, no matter who looks at you the wrong way, they said mean things to you. You know what? It doesn't move us. We just keep our focus on what we're supposed to be doing. But affliction and pressure and tribulation, we talked about this before, but the Greek word tribulation has to do with a crushing situation. It was the word that was used for an ancient form of torture where they would lay a boulder on somebody. They would start to lay this boulder on them, and just when it felt like it was too much, they'd pull it off and try to get them to do whatever they wanted them to do. If they still didn't, they'd lay it on them and lay it on them heavier. If they still didn't recant, they'd end up dropping that boulder on them. It would completely crush the person. Not a pleasant thing to think about. But that's the word that he's using. So he's talking about a situation that feels like you're under pressure. It's crushing you. Sometimes it feels like it's more than you can bear. But you know what? The very fact that you're facing it means that it's not too much for you to bear. It means that he is going to reinforce you with his strength to be able to overcome that situation. But when this pressure is coming against you, it's because you are starting to get Yahweh's direction and his purposes from the word. When you start, you ever notice that? Just when you start to grasp a hold of something, and it's like, I see that, it's like the victory's right there, all of a sudden all this stuff starts coming against you. Whether it be people or just the enemy stirring up circumstances in your life, he uses people a lot of times, but even the situations that are coming against you. But persecution is problems that are brought against you by people, from people that the enemy uses. He's going to bring it up. It happens. It happened to Yeshua. It's going to happen to us. But the enemy tries to use this persecution, this pressure, this affliction, if you want to say, to get you immediately offended. And if he catches you in offense, that's when you can trip up. The Greek word for offense is scandalizo, which you can see we get the word scandalize from. It means they're stumbled, tripped up, trapped, and sometimes enticed into sin. Now, that's always the goal of the enemy. Whenever he comes against you, whether it's with persecution, people just coming against you, or when he's coming against you with temptation, it's always to try to trip you up. If he can trip you up, you lose your footing, he's got you. You know that, and we were talking about that before Bible study started in martial arts, that your footing is everything. If an opponent can get your footing out from under you, he's got you. But we're supposed to be those who have firm-footed stability, because we have on the shoes of the gospel of shalom. That's holding us. But this persecution, not only does it reveal the authenticity of people, it separates the wheat from the chaff. You know, when that wind comes up, that's when the fruitcakes blow away. But that's when the chaff blows off of the wheat, and you can see, okay, that's the wheat that you want to use to make your bread. You don't want all that chaff mixed in there. It's not going to be a very good dish if you're trying to make it with all that chaff in there. But when the wheat and the chaff come together, they sprout. They look very similar. It takes the wind, the rain, the sun coming. It takes all of those things to get that chaff off to produce the real wheat. I saw this thing that said, it's persecution that separates the saints from the ain'ts. It really is. And when things start coming up against you because of a stand you take on the Word, that's when you find out who the true believers are. That's when you find out those who are really committed. You know, that's when you find out who's really on your side, is when things start happening. When people find out that the church is not just a social club, we're here as warriors to do kingdom assignments. A lot of people they don't want to go to battle. They want to stay home. I want something that's easier. But persecution challenges shallow faith and comfortable Christianity. Persecution's not comfortable. But we weren't born here to be comfortable in the flesh. We were born here to do Yahweh's purposes. Amen? Psalm 34:19 says, many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. That's his promise to us. So all this persecution is going to come up against you, but he's going to deliver us out of it. That's what he says. 2 Timothy 3:12 says, indeed, all who desire to live a godly life in Yeshua. Do we desire to live a godly life in Yeshua? Yes. All who desire to live a godly life in Yeshua will be persecuted. Comes with the territory. Just get used to it. Get used to different. Get used to it. 1 Peter 2, verse 12 says, conduct yourself properly, honorably, righteously among the Gentiles, so that although they may slander you as evildoers, yet they may by witnessing your good deeds come to glorify God in the day of inspection. So they might come against you, say all these evil things against you, but they notice when you're different. They notice when you're not reacting to what they're doing. Let's turn over to 1 Peter chapter 4 real quick. 1 Peter chapter 4, we'll start at verse 1. So since the Messiah suffered in the flesh for us, for you, arm yourselves with the same thought and purpose, patiently to suffer rather than fail to please God. What suffering is he talking about? For whoever has suffered in the flesh, having the mind of the Messiah, is done with intentional sin, has stopped pleasing himself and the world, and pleases God. so that he can no longer spend the rest of his natural life living by his human appetites and desires, but he lives for what God wills. See, again, that's the suffering that he's calling us to. For the time that is past already suffices for doing what the Gentiles like to do, living in shamelessness, insolent wantonness, in lustful desires, drunkenness, reveling, drinking bouts, and abominable lawless idolatries. They are astonished and think it very queer that you do not now run hand in hand with them in the same excesses of dissipation, and they abuse you. So they think it's strange that you're not going along with them, and they abuse you. But they will have to give an account to him who is ready to judge and pass sentence on the living and the dead. For this is why the good news was preached even to the dead, that though judged in fleshly bodies as men are, they may live in the spirit as God does. But the end and culmination of all things has now come near. Keep sound-minded and self-restrained and alert, therefore, for the practice of prayer. Above all things, have intense and unfailing love for one another, for love covers a multitude of sins. Practice hospitality for one another, and do it ungrudgingly. And as each of you has received a gift, employ it for one another as good trustees of God's many-sided grace. Whoever speaks, let him do it as one who utters oracles of God. Whoever renders service, let him do it as with the strength that God furnishes abundantly, so that in all things God may be glorified through the Messiah Yeshua. To him be glory forever and ever. Amen. Beloved, do not be amazed and bewildered at the fiery ordeal which is taking place to test your quality, as though something strange, unusual, and alien to you and your position were befalling you. So he's speaking to a church that's being persecuted. He's saying, don't think that this is something unusual and weird. Don't think it's strange. But insofar, verse 13, as you are sharing in the Messiah's suffering, rejoice, so that when his glory is revealed, you may also rejoice with triumph. So he's saying rejoice in the midst of it, so then you'll be rejoicing later. If you are censured and suffer abuse because you bear the name of the Messiah, blessed are you. Happy, fortunate to be envied, with life, joy, and satisfaction in God's favor and salvation, regardless of your outward condition, because the Spirit of glory, the Spirit of God, is resting on you. On their part, he is blasphemed, but on your part, he is glorified. But let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or any sort of criminal. See, he's saying you're not being persecuted if you're doing these things. That's just you doing the wrong things. Or as a mischief maker and meddler in the affairs of others, infringing on their rights. But if as a Christian, which he is contemptuously called, let him not be ashamed, but give glory to God that he is in this name. For the time for judgment to begin with the household of God. And if it begins with us, what will be the end of those who do not respect or believe or obey the good news? So, again, he's saying they're going to encounter these things. There's going to be pressures. There's going to be afflictions that are coming up against him. Chapter 5, verse 7. Let's go down there. 1 Peter 5, 7. Casting the whole of your cares, all your anxiety, all your worries, all your concerns, once and for all on him, for he cares for you affectionately and cares about you watchfully. Be well balanced, temperate, sober of mind. Be vigilant and cautious at all times. For that enemy of yours, the devil, roams around like a lion, roaring in fierce hunger, seeking someone to seize upon and devour. Withstand him, be firm in faith against his onset, rooted, established, strong, immovable, and determined. See, you're not like that chaff. You're not like that plant that just barely had any root and is immediately blown away when the wind comes against him. You're rooted, you're strong, you're established, you're determined, you're immovable. Knowing that the same sufferings are appointed to your brotherhood throughout the world. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his own eternal glory in the Messiah Yeshua, will himself complete and make you what you ought to be, establish and ground you securely, and strengthen and settle you. Now that's his promise. If you're going to hold your ground, then he's going to make sure that you are not moved. How many people, and even the ones that we know of in the Word, John, for example, John was one that he was severely persecuted. I mean, he was dropped into a pot of boiling oil. They're trying to boil him alive, but he wouldn't boil. That's called being redeemed out of the persecution. Persecution came, but it didn't overtake him. So then they finally say, well, we can't do anything with this old man. Just banish him to that island. And he writes the book of Revelation. He receives this revelation that we're reading here. But it's interesting because when Peter's talking about persecution, he's talking about a persecution that's coming, and it's not a physical persecution. Like he never says in there they're going to be beating you up and all that. He's talking about people who are being maligned for their lifestyle as believers. It's verbal abuse, in other words. They're being slandered. And that was one of the biggest things that came against the church in Smyrna. Talking about Smyrna, there was and we saw it in there, it said that those who were coming against them, who claimed to be Jews but were the synagogue of Satan, there was a high Jewish population in Smyrna, and a lot of them did not even like followers of the way. They were totally against it. The Jews in Smyrna were exempt from worshiping the emperor, which was interesting. The emperor gave them some sort of amnesty that they didn't have to participate in the idolatry and all that because they served one God. But because the Christians came in as a sect of Judaism that nobody liked, they basically were outside of that. So you had them bringing slanders against the Christians. What were some of the slanders that they brought against them? Well, one of them was that they had these orgies in which they would actually eat Jesus. They would eat the body of Jesus because they broke bread and all that. And so they were therefore cannibals. So big slander that came against the early Christians in Smyrna was that they were cannibals. That caused them to be really shunned by the world around them. Now, another one is, I thought this was interesting. I was listening to Rick Renner. He goes into detail on Smyrna and everything. But they called each other brother and sister in the body of Christ, your brother and sister, and therefore they were anti-family. They did not believe that family mattered. They only thought that the church mattered. Where have we heard that before? I think that we've heard people say that against us before. No, it's not that we don't think anything of family. It's just there's even throughout the word, there are people that came alongside people that weren't even their family and were stronger than their family. But they were experiencing this pressure from the outside of all this slander that was accusing them of being cannibals, accusing them of having these drunken parties, which was completely opposite of anything that they were doing, accusing them that they were anti-family, which Rome was big on family. Family was the biggest thing in Rome. So they were basically the outcast of society. A lot of the church in Smyrna, they began as slaves. They were of the slave class, so they were already lower class citizens, but these accusations that were brought against them put them in such a class that they were even below slaves. So slaves even back then had some sort of income. They did earn some sort of living. But these believers in Smyrna, a lot of them had no way of getting a job because nobody would hire them. They didn't worship the emperor. They wouldn't offer the sacrifices at the business. So they had a hard time finding a job. That's why he says, you are poor, but you are rich. There's a lot of people that I think may seem like they have everything in this life, but really they're poor spiritually. They think that they have everything going for them. They're living the life, but they have nothing as far as eternal value goes. But these people in Smyrna would have also been pressured by their friends and their neighbors. They were once part of these worshiping these gods with them. They came out from among that, and now they're facing the criticism of that. Like he said, they think you're strange for not running hand in hand with them like you once did. But they also were experiencing this tribulation from this sect of Jews that were persecuting them. And it's interesting that Yeshua says they were of the synagogue of Satan. That's a pretty strong words. I mean, it kind of goes along with the, you're a brood of vipers thing that he said. But it causes you to say, are there nowadays people within the church that claim to be Christians, claim to be followers of the way, but they're really of the church of Satan? Pretty strong way to look at it, but in the words of the Master, there are some. There was a great pressure on the church at this point in Smyrna to abandon Passover. This is where it began. They were being pressured because a lot of the churches in Rome began celebrating Easter as a replacement for Passover. All this stuff starts coming up in later years. But there was a bishop in the church. He's one of the most familiar to anybody who studies early church history. His name was Polycarp. And he was well known for his contributions to the early church. But he also was one of the biggest ones who stood for continuing to observe Passover. And he was a strong leader, but he continued to observe Passover on the 14th of Nisan, as the Bible requires. And so this difference between the churches in Rome and those in Asia continued throughout the lifetimes of Polycarp, and then they end up getting a pope in place. That's when the Catholic Church starts getting into the popes and everything. But they start to persecute the church in Asia for celebrating Passover. So now you have, not only is the church being persecuted from the outside, now you have certain sects of the church that are branching off and persecuting those who are still following the Bible. So now it's just it's a messy situation. But he's talking to the church of Smyrna at this point, and this is obviously before the Pope and all this stuff is going on. But he's telling them that they're blessed. He's telling them that they have something of eternal value. Again, the church of Smyrna, he didn't have anything to say against them. He didn't say that they were missing it in any area. He basically tells them, keep doing what you're doing and stay strong, because you're going to receive the victor's crown. They overcame the negative attacks of the society. They were overcomers. They overcame the intense pressure that they were under to reject Yeshua. They overcame this verbal and physical abuse that they were encountering. They overcame the temptation to accept the pleasures of the world and be unfaithful to Yeshua. They overcame the lies of the false religions. They overcame the fear of death. I mean, just in the natural, there had to have been thoughts of fear that came against them. They know that they're in a place where all it takes is one person to say something that's slanderous against you, and you're hauled before the emperor, and that's it. That's already happening. But they did not allow that to stop them from being who they were supposed to be. They didn't let it ruin their witness. And this is the kind of faith that is real. This is the kind of boldness that is real. You look in Hebrews where it talks about even the ones who were persecuted, that they passed through the fires and they weren't burned, and some received their dead back. I mean, how many times was Paul stoned? Normally a person is stoned once and that's it. You're gone. But he stood up again. Paul went through so many things, but he was delivered out of them all. That's how you're supposed to walk. No matter what the persecution is, no matter what may come against you, you're always to overcome it and to keep on walking. The charge to live as overcomers was real to that church in Smyrna, but it's just as real today. We might not be experiencing the kind of persecution that like the church in China or North Korea or other areas of the world's experiencing, the physical persecution, but we are starting to experience persecution as far as what people are saying about those who stand up as true Bible believers. I mean, the fight for marriage, the fight for the unborn in this nation. There are people who are slandering those who are taking a stand. And you got to decide what side of the line you're going to stand on and not straddle the fence anymore. This is a time for us to stand strong on the Word and know that if we're standing strong on the Word, He's the one who's backing us up. He's the one who's going to bring us through it all. It's not going to destroy us, it's going to make us stronger. The persecution, the wind, what happens when a tree is grown in an environment where there's no wind or nothing coming against it? It's a very weak tree. They did a case study where they had trees that were growing in this like enclosed environment when there was nothing, and the trees all just were falling over. They didn't have any real strong root. That wind, the elements that are coming around are necessary to develop those roots. And how many of you have ever seen a tree that's growing on the side of a mountain or on the side of a cliff, and its roots are like wrapped around rocks and into crevices. And no matter what hurricane comes against that cliff, hurricane force wind, that tree's still standing there. That's how we're supposed to be. Ones who have real root in us, that no matter what comes against us, then we stand strong. So our charge, just like the church of Smyrna, is to remain faithful no matter what. And we don't let those detractors, those who are coming against us, deter us. Like Nehemiah when he was building the wall. Come down and meet with us on the plains of Ono. And he said, oh no, I am not. I've been given a charge here, and I'm not leaving my post. I'm not leaving it for anything. That needs to be our determination. And that's when we are going to start to see the victory that we're supposed to walk in. Victory in the midst of the trials, victory in the midst of the persecution, victory right here on this earth in the midst of whatever the enemy might send, because that's who he's called us to be. Amen? We trust you've gotten something out of this message tonight. Quick announcement.